Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone in the chamber and those listening online to the Lincolnshire Council Audit Committee. Can I please remind those that are in attendance that the audio-visual feed of this meeting is being broadcasted live via the Council's website. We will now move on to the formal agenda, and that is item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Locke and Ian Haldenby.
Thank you. And then item number 2, declarations of members' interests. Do any members wish to declare anything? No. And then item number 3, minutes of the previous meeting. This item is to approve the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Does anybody have any points on the accuracy of the minutes? Do I have a proposer? Councillor Bunny. Seconder? Councillor Roberts. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Any abstentions? That is carried. We'll now move over onto the items of business. So first we have the draft statements of accounts and we are receiving a report from Amanda Reid, Strategic Finance Manager.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the draft annual statement of accounts for both Lincolnshire County Council and the Lincolnshire Pension Fund for 25-26. These draft statements were both published by the statutory due date of the 30th of June 26, which in turn triggers the public inspection period as set out in legislation. As the administrating authority for the Lincolnshire Pension Fund, our accounts also includes the financial statements for the fund, both of which will be reviewed by our external auditors to ensure they present a true and fair presentation of the Council's financial position and that they have been compiled with compliance to the professional accounting codes of practice. Our accounts contain a narrative report, which is a key area for the reader, as it summarises key financial information, reviews our performance in the year, and explains significant areas of risk and opportunity to the Council. The narrative report also refers to the Council's financial performance report, which was presented to Overview and Scrutiny Board on the 25th of June and the Executive on the 14th of July. The final audited accounts are expected to be presented to Audit Committee on the 16th of November, prior to the statutory deadline of the 31st of January 2027 for the publication of the final audited statement of accounts. Members of the Audit Committee are asked to consider the contents of the statement of accounts and to raise any questions they may have.
Thank you, Amanda. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have a few questions, so I guess I'll do one or two and then you can come back to me afterwards to give other people a chance, if that's all right?
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Brilliant. So, first of all, on page 45, it talks about the usable reserves are decreasing. So I just want to get an idea of, in terms of long-term risk for this council, how much of a risk does that present? And is this an ongoing trend where we expect the usable reserves to continue to deteriorate?
So if I have a go at answering that one. So absolutely right that usable reserves would be a reflection of the financial resilience of the council. I think one thing that's helpful to see is the general fund reserve hasn't moved at all. In fact, it was increased from the previous year. And any use of reserve was planned. So I can provide that assurance that the use of reserve was planned, it was set in our budget, and we haven't used any reserves because we've effectively not got enough money to pay for the services that we're delivering. What we have done over the last few years is add money into the reserves when we've had year-end balances, and those monies have been committed to things like additional highway spend, additional money through the development fund. So they have been used for those purposes and have been drawn down for those purposes, which I don't think reflects the financial resilience of the council in the way that if you was drawing on the general fund reserve for unplanned expenditure might do. So hopefully that provides a level of assurance.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, also just to touch on pensions as well. So on page 50, it gives us a breakdown of the investment assets effectively. Now, there is a lot of talk that central government are looking to mandate pension investments to bring more back into UK-based investment. Obviously, we've got a sizable international investment. So, again, where does this leave the pension fund? Is there a significant risk of the government mandates that investment into the UK that we're going to be in a situation where we're going to lose out on return at that point?
So I think Pensions Committee do discuss this at length, but to provide some assurance back here, the government haven't mandated what you can invest your fund in. What they have mandated is that you need to have a local investment strategy, and you need to have an investment strategy that the committee signs off and can commit to in terms of Border to Coast, who's our pension fund pool company, how they then invest that. So they will still look to invest where you're getting the fiduciary return that you're expecting, and we will set an investment strategy that means that they will be looking at local investments and other UK investments. What local is a bit of an unknown entity as well. So the government hasn't mandated us to do anything that's going to financially disbenefit the fund. What they have done is said that you need to have a strategy about how you're approaching local investment. I think that covers it. Councillor Roberts can probably pick up any more on that if there's anything else to add from Pensions Committee, but that is something that the committee have talked about quite a bit.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts, did you want to say something?
I was just going to concur what Michelle said. In the Pensions Committee, we have been told we have to have a strategy, but it's not a massive grab. It sounds like they're trying to get us and force us to invest half of it, and it's nowhere near that. I think it's almost down to us how much we invest. I think
the local investment strategy is up to 5% over a period of time. So I think the challenge is if the government starts to mandate how you use your investment, that they risk moving into taking the liability from the fund as well. So they have to be a bit careful about that.
Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Of course, the obvious growth pressures have been known to us for some time. Adult social care, children's social care, special education needs, etc. The demand curve seems to be forever rising at a pace that normal council tax increases couldn't possibly live with. Do we have to just accept that and wait for a national solution to it, or is there something we can do strategically in Lincolnshire that might get ahead of the curve? I'm thinking, for instance, was it 600 and some odd specially purchased places in the private sector and or out of county? Would more homegrown facility and service help to address that cost growth?
So I think this is part of what Heather talked about when she was here in June. So some of the strategic risks around the delivery, particularly of children's services. So the two big risk areas for children's are SEND. And in terms of SEND, we've got investment going on in the county around creating the hubs as a result of some of the reforms that's required. So big investment in mainstream hubs for children with that can be supported rather than sending them to a different school. So that investment's ongoing, an improvement programme around children's placements and children's social care. I think very aware of the fact that sometimes specialist placements are the most effective way to pay to support those children, but clearly rising numbers is a concern, and it's part of the work that children's do. I think in adults as well, they've got their improvement programme. They're looking at people coming into the service and how we best support those people. So I think it was something that Heather talked at quite a bit of length last month at Audit Committee as part of their risk assurance. But there are actions being taken. However, demand is increasing. Absolutely, demand is increasing. The SEND reforms have pushed the SEND requirements around EHCPs massively up as a response to that. So we're having to respond to that as well as trying to put mitigations in place.
If I may come back, Chair, that's all reassuring. If I can give you an insight from the receiving end of the inclusiveness strategy within mainstream schools. The school where I'm a governor got an Ofsted report that said, this is a highly inclusive school. Now that has proved to be a poison chalice, because the world and all its children want to enrol in that school. And we receive 6,500 for each of those students, and they cost about 12,000 to deliver to. So we're going through a reorganisation, losing a vice principal, losing a couple of teachers, because that's the only way we can balance the books with an underfunded special needs impact in mainstream schools. Are you cited on that in Lincolnshire schools? And is there any way of relieving that pressure to avoid curriculum shrinkage and staff redundancies in mainstream schools?
So Martin Smith's the Assistant Director responsible for that area. Heather, I say, has spoken around the risks. We've had to issue a SEND plan back to government to effectively qualify us for the funding that goes with the reforms, and that's happened. So we've published and responded to government with our SEND improvement plan, our high needs improvements that's ongoing. I personally don't know whether they're cited on that, but I'm sure they are. But we can ask for that to be fed back if that's helpful.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak? Councillor Carrington.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Mr. Middleton made, not just about SEND, but about children's provision, really as an example of other very, very high-level risks. Michelle referred to conversations that we had in our June meeting, which was very helpful, particularly on the subject of SEND, but we have this exponential increase in demand. I suggested in that meeting that this council undertook a strategic review, and indeed I questioned the senior officer on that topic, really because I was seeking guidance on just how much control we had here in Lincolnshire, as opposed to what was forced on us by central government. I still think, particularly given the elephant in the room, which is of course LGR, and we now know more about the shape of LGR, that whilst this council continues to exist, which it will do for the next couple of years, we have such a level of expertise here. I just reiterate that thought that both on SEND and on children's care, we ought to be looking at this because we have the expertise and we can perhaps hand on lessons to our successor councils. Children's care is another one of those areas that Mr. Middleton has mentioned where the costs are extraordinary. Those of us who are involved at local planning authority level know that in most LPAs, and there are 7 across our county, in most LPAs we will have barely a month goes by without a planning application to take an individual dwelling and turn it into a small specialised childcare unit. Now, I'm not for a moment saying that that demand doesn't exist. Private companies do this. You'll probably only have 2 or 3 young persons who might be anything from 6 to 16 or 17 in such a dwelling. It is a massively expensive way of doing it. Their revenue base is enormous, and yet we continue with that system because we don't have sufficient central provision. Now, I'm not saying I have all the answers, Chairman, but it does seem to me that this council has a very strong and very proud record going back many, many years in good children's care. And I still think that it would be useful for us to have some sort of strategic level review while we still exist to help prepare the way for those who will follow us, because these are, we were talking before this meeting about unfunded risks in terms of pension, but this is another effectively unfunded risk because demand is going up much, much faster than the supply of money to pay for it. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, that'll be noted. Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. On page 134, amount of staff seems to have gone up 20% in 1 year, and yet the amount of staff, as in teachers or staff in schools, as we know personally, as I know personally, has gone down. Could we explain why we've had a 20% increase in 1 year, and why we're having to get rid of front end, or obviously the front line in teachers, please? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the table in there. Is it the reports page 134? Yeah, okay. So the notes to the accounts just include the staff that are paid above the brackets in the table, if it's the table that I'm thinking of. If I'll just get there. So it would just be that the number of staff that are falling into those brackets have gone up, I think, rather than so there's a couple of things here. The number of staff that the organisation employs has increased due to we've insourced a few big groups of staff. So when the Serco contract ended, we insourced all of those staff back to the council. I think that was just shy of, it was about 100 came into our team and some came into payroll. We've insourced the leaving care service when that contract ended, and indeed we've just insourced the LPFT staff that were delivering the mental health services. So there's been a shift of staff that were previously contracted out. If I can just find the table that you're looking for. My computer's not playing, but 134, sorry. Is it just that those brackets are... Yeah, so the officers' remuneration table only captures the staff above 50,000. So it's not all of the staff in that number. So as salaries go up, obviously more people will fall into the requirement of being reported in the table. So that there's two moving parts there. The number of staff we employ is actually increasing because we're insourcing staff, but also it doesn't capture the staff at the lower level salary brackets. So as people move up into plus 50,000 salary brackets, they get included in the table and they wouldn't have been previously. I hope that's understandable. It just doesn't capture all of our staff, that table, just the staff being paid over 50,000.
Can I come back, Chair? Yeah, I can see your point. The fact that obviously there's more and more people earning over 50, which in Lincolnshire is higher than normal wage. That's also a little concerning. But also concerning on page 137 is the exit packages, which it seems to be we've got rid of a lot of the front line. 40 goes up, and then how much we've actually had to pay out for exit strategy. So I've got a two-pronged question. We seem to be getting rid of the front line and not so much of the top end, which could fund a lot more of the front line. But also the exit packages are £2 million, which is a lot of money to pay out for getting. Is there any chance we can get explanation of what people are getting paid out, why they're getting paid out? Is it always, well, obviously it says compulsory redundancies, but obviously it's a lot of money. And then my final part to the question is, LGR is going to be carnage, because we're going to be seeing a lot of exit packages. Is there not some way, I know the answer to this one, we can relook at that, because it's a massive amount to pay out for a council. It's not like this in the private sector in any way, shape or form. Thank you.
So the majority of those exit packages are to do with compulsory redundancy, so where we've identified somebody's job is no longer required in the organisation. So by design, that means they're not replaced. So that will be a permanent saving in terms of their salary and on costs to the organisation. The package itself, the redundancy is set by policy. So the number of weeks you get paid relates to the number of years service you've got, and that's based on your salary, and it's capped at a number of weeks. So that's all quite defined in policy. What we also have, and what's probably a large proportion of some of those costs, is if you make somebody redundant over 55, they automatically can access their LGPS pension. We then have to make a contribution. So that's not a payment to the person, that will be a payment to the fund to support their early release of their pension. And that's all calculated based on, again, on their year's service and their age and what they're pulling down out of their pension. So that not necessarily will all go to the person. A big chunk of that will go to the pension fund to fund the early release if they qualify in that respect. I think in terms of the larger numbers of the lower salary brackets being made redundant, I think there's been a big push over the last couple of years. To be fair, a lot of these are voluntary redundancies where people have chosen to leave, but where we're making administrative efficiencies, and that's been part of our budget to make those efficiencies through administration efficiency to allow those posts to be released as permanent savings into the organisation, so we can invest more on things that we've talked about, like social care costs and things like that. Hopefully that explains the table.
Thank you. Sorry, just before we go to Councillor Parkinson, I'd like to just come back to what Councillor Carrington previously said and wanted to ask for a review. So could you just compact what you're looking for and then see if we can get a comment from the officer, please? Thank you.
The word compact is terrifying, as my friends will tell you. Really, Chairman, to summarise, we have strategic issues with elements of the cost of children's services. My concern, as expressed in detail in June, was that we try and ensure that those resources we do have are focused on the children who really need them. Therefore, I was concerned that we should review what difference we can make to maximising the efficiencies of SEND provision, and also how much money we can get in from government to contribute towards that, but also to maximise the efficiencies of caring for individual children, because it is vastly more expensive to provide children's care in a regular 3-bedroom house with 3 kids and 3 carers in it than it would be in a professionally run home. So it was a review of basically risks and cost pressures versus how do we actually deal with this ever-ascending demand and a finite level of resource.
Brilliant, thank you. And obviously, as I said before, that's all been noted, but I just wanted to come back and see if we could get an officer's comment on that, please.
Thank you, Chairman.
So not possible for anyone in this room to comment, I don't think, on that, because that's why the directors were here in June to feedback from their service provision point of view. I think my view would be, Heather would tell you that the strategy is it's always cheaper to place children with family. It's then cheaper to, more, say it's cheaper. Cost isn't the main driver there as well. So it's better for the child in outcomes, and it's more cost efficient to place them with family. It's then better to place them in foster care, and we do an awful lot of work around trying to grow our foster care provision. and then placements and external placements. But I'm sure Heather would be happy to provide a statement, but I don't think there's anyone that could give that justice maybe in the room today. That was part of the exec director feedback in June.
Okay, that's fine. Did you want to come back on that?
Just to thank you for taking that forward, and I agree with Michelle. I think if the service director can actually come back and comment on that, that would be most helpful.
No problem. Thank you. Any more questions? Oh yeah, we were going back to Councillor Parkinson there.
Thank you. I've got a few more. On page 139, it talks about the DSG deficit. Now, I know that this council has for many years actually done a fantastic job of being one of the last councils to go into that deficit effectively, which is a fantastic record for us to have. Now, I know that I believe the government are allowing us to write off potentially a significant portion of the deficit over a period of years. So those councils that haven't managed it as effectively are actually going to be better off than we are. Moving forward, well, because they've got a huge deficit, they've lost lots of money, the government are going to let them write off to 90%, aren't they, through the grant? So actually, where we've done a good job of not going into that deficit earlier, we're actually going to lose out effectively, which is a real shame. Moving forward, obviously, we are now going to have to fund the DSG deficit, and on the balance sheet, it's a little bit easier to manage, but the money still has to come from somewhere. So in terms of long-term planning, where is that money going to come from? Is it coming out of a general fund, or what's the long-term plan?
So I would argue we are better off for not having as much money written off, because we've got less of the 10% is a much lower figure for us than those councils that have got hundreds of millions of pounds of deficit. I agree they're getting a bigger figure written off, but they've also got a bigger figure that they need to sort out themselves. So I think we are in the best place in terms of that. There's been a statutory override in place for a number of years that has meant that this can be parked in the accounts, and we don't have to worry too much about that. Clearly, with the introduction of the grant funding, that statutory override will finish, and we will have to make provision. That will be something we will need to build into our budget setting going forward, because it's not just as simple as taking it off the balance sheet somewhere. We'll have to do something for the current year, but going forward, we'll have to build that into our pressures for the organisation, and that will form part of the MTFP, the medium-term plan, for the new organisations as well.
So will that present then financial pressures in other areas then as a result of having to factor that in?
It's an overall cost pressure. So you'll remember when we set the budget for this year, our overall cost pressures was 85 million. 85 million, you have to balance that with the funding and the potential income that you can get, and that leaves you in a position where do you need to make savings to deliver a balanced budget. So that will form part of that calculation when we come to setting the budget for next year.
Andrew?
It's a question for Michelle. You mentioned you'd in-housed, if that's brought in-house, a couple of contracted services. What's the cost-benefit analysis read like on those changes? Is it more economical, or is it for quality control?
I think there's an element of both. I think directly employing staff is more expensive in the council, but actually you can do these things more efficiently, I think is probably the point. We've made savings from the payroll staff that have come in and from the exchequer staff that have come in, but you're getting a better service, I think, as well, and it helps us to make efficiencies in the way we do our systems and processes, which you can't always do when you've got a contracted provision. So a directly employed person will probably cost you more than it would cost Serco or a contractor to employ them. However, if you're looking at the function overall, it's more cost beneficial to have them in-house at the present. Might not be a future consideration, but at the present, that was the better option. And we went through that whole business case, and that was a decision that would have gone through scrutiny at the time.
Thank you. We got any more questions? Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. Page 143, it talks about an investment into Hoople. Could anyone clarify what Hoople do and why we invested in it, if that's possible, please?
So Hoople is a tackle company for Herefordshire County Council, and that's basically a company that delivers predominantly services that are for the council. So the tackle means that they don't have to be bought through open competition because they are predominantly a company that's owned by the council, providing services for the council. We made a decision a number of years ago to buy our business world system through it, so our finance and HR system is bought through them. Because it's a TECL company, we're effectively a shareholder of that company and an owner rather than a contracted provider. It's a slightly different relationship, so than being just a contracted provision. We're a shareholder, a minority shareholder, but we are a shareholder of that company purely for the provision of our finance and HR systems.
So what's the benefit of that? So I'm presuming there must be a cost benefit for us doing that.
Absolutely. The benefit was that the cost of Business World is based on the number of licenses you have, and because collectively we have a larger number, it's an efficiency of scale thing. And then Hoop will provide the support back to us for maintaining the system and the system architecture. So it's a cost efficiency in the size. We would have paid a lot more for our own instance of the system because we've got fewer users.
Yeah, thank you. And then to move on to page 145, it talks about Deeping Leisure Centre coming back to us. I know it's been an ongoing issue for those members over in Deeping for quite a long time now, really. So I suppose, is there any more indication in terms of what the long-term plan is? I know that there are members that want to see it invested in and reopened. The district has struggled with the financials on that, which I believe is likely the reason why it's come back to us. So where do we stand at the moment? Because in terms of its actual value, it's quite difficult because it's very run down and would need significant investment. Do we have an indication what's going to happen with that long term?
So there's obviously been ongoing dialogue around Deepings. My understanding is the latest position is they're waiting for the Academy Trust to come back. I think they've had a change in head teacher and a change in view about what the school relationship can be there. So I think property are just waiting for that feedback to come back. Clearly, the real challenge is that it's a part of the site that's the Academy site, and we need to agree the lease with the Academy. But the leisure centre hasn't been run by the county ever, I don't think. So obviously the relationship with South K there is but my understanding is that they're just waiting for that feedback from the new head teacher around the Academy Trust.
Anything else? Councillor
Thank you.
Parkinson.
I've completely read this report. You'd be delighted to know. So page 151, it talks about depreciation and in terms of how we depreciate certain assets. So I believe on there it talks about capital pothole filling as a depreciable asset. How does that work? But also, as we probably all found, a few potholes need filling a few times within a short period of time. So do you depreciate every single job that you do, or is it just the one pothole? Like, how do we structure that? Because you also have cluster potholes. It's quite complicated.
So complicated is a good way to describe it. The infrastructure asset valuation was something that the auditors pointed out that we maybe, as a whole body of sector, maybe wasn't doing the way we should be doing it. However, I believe we categorise spend, and then each year whatever's spent on that category gets depreciated in the way that we've said. So you will have a category of spend that says we've spent X million on potholes. We'll apply a depreciation level to that based on when it was spent and what the category of spend is, rather than by individual pothole.
Okay, so it's done purely on the amount of money that you spend on that area, not the actual amount of potholes that you've filled then effectively.
These are purely accounting transactions for the valuation of our roads in the balance sheet. As I say, if you were going to sell our road estate, it would be a helpful thing to do. Clearly, our road estate isn't for sale, so maybe not so helpful as it would be if you were in the private sector valuing your assets. But we apply our depreciation on a cost of spend rather than a category of spend rather than the asset itself, if that makes sense.
Okay, so just on that, so obviously you've got the 60 years for major road structures as well. So I'm assuming you have things like the Grantham Southern Relief Road, the North Highcombe Relief Road. So those are things that you'll put on the balance sheet as a depreciating asset, basically all at the same time. You're not going to structure those in any way. It'll just be all clumped in together.
It's based on when the asset comes onto use. So there won't you're going to tell me if I'm doing this wrong now, but effectively we apply things like revenue provision and depreciation when the assets come into life, or a period of time. So the cost of the use of it is related to the people that are benefiting from it, the timescales.
Okay, so they're not actually depreciating as of yet because
No.
they're not open for the public at this point.
They're not in use now.
Any more questions?
Sorry,
Yes.
just quickly, this is my last one, I promise.
Fine.
Around the annual governance statement, the only thing that I would raise when it talks about engagement with stakeholders and councillors, I had raised this with a different area other than audit in terms of place, where I've been excluded from emails regarding decisions in my area, correspondence with businesses in my area. That doesn't feel like there's, you know, a level of openness between councillors and the local authority. It's quite frustrating when decisions get made, then I have to hear about it from somebody else rather than through LCC. So the only thing I would say on that is that it's something that needs to be looked at, that councillors are made aware when Lincolnshire County Council are talking to local businesses, making decisions, that the local councillor is aware, because it makes our life very difficult when you get a phone call saying, what's happened here? And I say, I don't know, nobody's told me about it. Makes us all look a little bit silly. So that would be the only thing that I'd recommend that we need to do better on.
Noted. Thank you. Any more questions? Right. So the report and discussion have been noted. Does anybody dissent? Thank you. So that one is agreed. So we now move on to item number 5, and that is to receive the annual report from the Monitoring Officer, Will Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. Yes, this is my annual report for the period 1st of April 2025 to the 31st of March 2026, which will detail activity relating to governance, constitutional compliance, ethical standards, member conduct, member interests, RIPA and transparency matters. In terms of the Council's constitution over the year, that has been kept updated and reviewed in the following areas: work in relation to the financial regulations and budget definitions following a review of the Treasury Management Strategy, a review of the Chief Officer delegations and functions, the proper officer appointments, and miscellaneous reviews of committee terms of reference and overview and scrutiny rules. In terms of lawfulness, all decision reports to the Council, Executive and Executive Councillor continue to receive my legal review to ensure compliance with legislation, procedural requirements and the Council's powers, particularly to ensure that the Council is acting within its powers. There have been no formal monitoring officer reports issued under Section 5 of the 1989 Act, as I've determined that no decisions were identified that required that intervention on the grounds of unlawfulness. In relation to standards and member conduct, 12 Code of Conduct complaints were received during the period, which is a slight increase compared with the complaints in the previous year of 4. Of the 12 complaints, 5 were dismissed as not engaging the code, generally because they're related to members that were not members of this authority and have been misdirected to the County Council. 2 complaints were closed after the complainant ceased to engage further. 4 were closed with no further action following consultation with the independent person, and 1 complaint remains open as at today, but that is to be concluded shortly. No formal standards hearings were held, and standards training was a pivotal part of the councillor induction following the May 2025 elections. In relation to standards reform, the committee did receive a report on the government's response to the consultation on strengthening standards and conduct framework for local authorities, which had included proposals for a substantial reform of the standards regime. But further legislation is awaited on this, and I note that from the King's speech, the legislation that was planned was not included. So quite when the legislation that's required to underpin these reforms comes on stream remains to be seen. In relation to member interests, all councils completed their registers of disclosable pecuniary interests. Several requests relating to sensitive interests were considered under the Local Islam Act 2011, and the protocol that we have with Lincolnshire Police for the investigation of disclosable pecuniary interest breaches was reviewed in January 2026. No formal dispensations were granted for members during the year, but none were requested, might I add. In terms of officer interests, the register of officer interests continue to be maintained, and I give personal consideration to every request and every register that comes through. In relation to RIPA, which is the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, no authorisations for covert surveillance were sought during the reporting period, and work has continued to update the Council's policies and increase the number of authorising officers to improve resilience and awareness of RIPA and its implications across the Council, and the annual RIPA report will shortly be presented to the relevant Executive Councillor for consideration. In relation to whistleblowing and transparency, the whistleblowing arrangements continue to be reported separately through the Internal Audit Service to this committee, and in terms of the Council's Transparency Code compliance, I continue to ensure oversight of that following the audit into the Transparency Code of last year. So that concludes my report. Chair, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Will. Do we have any questions? Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. As far as I'm aware, we don't have a standards committee, do we, here? So in terms of if there was something that needed to be escalated, would it come to this committee, or how would that process actually work?
Yeah, you're quite right, Councillor. There's no bespoke standards committee. Most councils do have. We've not had one, my understanding, for a number of years. So the way it would work is we would convene a hearings panel, basically a subcommittee of this committee, to sit as a hearings panel should we get to that point in the process.
Anybody else? No? So this report and discussion has been noted again. Does anybody dissent? Thank you, that is agreed as well. So we're now moving on to item number 6, and that is the review of the Constitution, Council Procedure Rules and Access to Information Procedure Rules, Policy Framework and the GLCCA Protocol, again from Will Bell, Monitoring Officer.
Thank you again, Chair. I shall take members through the three key aspects of this paper in some detail. So, in relation to the Council Procedure Rules, which are attached to Appendix A, what I'm seeking to ensure is that motions are received into Democratic Services 10 clear working days before the relevant council meeting, so that they can be validated and assessed by the Chief Financial Officer, and her comments on the financial implications of the motion to the council be added to the motion so that it's included in the council summons. This will bring the council's practice in line with Council Procedure Rule 11.2, which does stipulate that motions will be set out in the council agenda. And from my research, it seems to be that most councils operate in this way, which in my view serves to provide greater transparency, not least for members of the public. By the same token, amendments will need to be received into Democratic Services no later than noon on the third working day before the relevant council meeting, so that again they can be validated and assessed by the Chief Financial Officer, and her comments on the financial implications of the amendment to the council be added to the form of amendment before it is presented to the council. The current practice is that the CFO's comments are included in the order of proceedings that's distributed to all members following the chairman's pre-council briefing, but that's on the assumption that the amendment has been disclosed beforehand. Officers will be required to keep the content of amendments confidential unless the consent of the member proposing the amendment is given for it to be shared. And it's also proposed that the chairman's pre-council briefing a discussion is had with group leaders as to whether amendments may be shared in advance of the council meeting by inclusion in the order of proceedings to reflect the previous long-standing convention of the council, but the proposed changes do not compel group leaders to give advance notice of such amendments. All I'm seeking to do is promote a discussion and ensure that that discussion is codified in the Constitution. The changes also codify the number of amendments that may be moved, how multiple amendments might be handled in terms of consolidation, and the way that they are debated, if the chairman considers doing so would facilitate the proper conduct of the council's business. Unlike in other constitutions that I've considered, of which there have been many over the last few weeks, this simply gives authority for the chairman to propose these matters. It does not mandate the chairman to dictate how these matters should be handled. As I say, these changes fall short of that and simply enable the chairman to propose to council that they should be handled in this way. Council will collectively determine such matters, and as I say, there are some council constitutions that do go further and put that power in the sole hands of the chairman or the mayor, but my proposals fall short of that and simply encourage that conversation and that deliberation. Ultimately, though, it will be for the full council to take a view. The changes also look to the future, and particularly with technology in mind, to make provision for the recording of votes to be taken electronically in the event that the council would look to install the necessary technology in the council chamber, which I know many other councils have now done. There are also minor changes requiring members wishing to speak at committees of which they are not a member and outside of divisional matters to give prior written notice to the head of Democratic Services, specifying the item on which they seek to speak. I've subsequently amended the proposed change in the papers and circulated a revised draft following observations by members to state that rather than 24 hours prior written notice, it would perhaps be better expressed as notice to be given no later than noon on the preceding working day of the meeting, so as to avoid confusion over public holidays and weekends. And members exercising these speaking rights will be limited to 3 minutes, the same as in full council. There are also minor changes to the council's policy framework and the protocol that the council entered into with the Greater Lincolnshire Combined County Authority to reflect the fact that the council is no longer responsible for the production of the local transport plan. So that now needs to be deleted from the policy framework. That is now the responsibility of the GLCCA. And following the ending of the transitional period on the 31st of March 2026, which dealt with certain transitional powers, it's been necessary to make some minor amendments to the protocol to ensure that that now reflects the ending of that transitional period. So that is my report, Chair, and of course happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions? Councillor Parkinson.
Whose paper is this? Is this a joint paper with the exec and then yourself, Will, or is it your proposal? Who's come up with these ideas?
It's my paper. There was a discussion with the leader following the budget meeting, who asked me to review the council's sort of practice following the budget meeting, which I undertook and had extensive discussions with the Chief Finance Officer. But the proposals are mine. They were shared in outline with the leader several weeks ago, but in no particular detail. I've since gone away to formulate those proposals, considered many other councils' constitutions, and the report that's been presented to the Audit Committee was not shared with the leader before its production. It's come straight to this committee.
Okay, thank you. So, and obviously there's a lot made out about the length of the budget meeting. I suppose the only thing is, you know, it was, what, 7 hours long? When you're working through £1 billion budget, I mean, 7 hours isn't even a full working day, so I know a lot was said about it, but quite frankly, I don't think there was anything wrong with the length of the budget meeting. If you're going to spend £1 billion of taxpayers' money and you've got to sit there for 7 hours, that's just the reality of the situation. I think any sort of reaction to it is completely overblown, if I'm being honest. You know, most of us, if you said, oh, by the way, you can 9:30 till 4:30, that's a beautiful working day. Most people would take that in a heartbeat. Yeah, that's all the time that we spent scrutinising £1 billion of taxpayers' money. So I think the reaction is overdrawn. When you're looking at 10 days for a motion is obscene. I mean, why? This council has a proud record. It's never been an issue historically. It's not something that we've needed. So why now? What's the reason that all of a sudden we've decided that actually this is the way that we need to go? What's the actual justification for it?
Yeah, if I can take that, Chair. Yeah, I mean, the justification is obviously I've carried out a review and examined the practice, not just at this council, but at other councils. And I do think that actually the way that we have, in terms of the production of motions and not included them in the summons, I think we are an outrider with other councils, quite frankly. So, you know, in terms of the review, I've taken the opportunity through this paper to seek to correct that, because I do think, strictly speaking, the proper interpretation is that motions on notice should be set out in the council summons along with all the other reports and papers that are to be presented to council, rather than after the summons has gone out. And in relation to the budget meeting, I'm not seeking through any of these changes to really change any significant practice. I'm simply seeking to codify some of the conventions that have long operated at this council to good effect. But one area that, on reflection, I thought it was appropriate to seek to take the opportunity to review was the production of amendments, and particularly in terms of the budget, to ensure that the Chief Financial Officer's comments are included in the amendments, so that when the amendments are put before members, they have the confidence to know that they have been approved by the CFO. And I think that is a proportionate suggestion, and indeed it simply builds again on the existing custom and practice that has operated at the council, where amendments that have been moved, generally speaking, have been commented on by the Chief Financial Officer in the order of proceedings. All I'm seeking to do is ensure that that's reflected in the body of the amendment, and therefore to ensure that we can give these matters proper diligence is just to building a little bit of breathing space to enable officers to turn these matters around. So that's the purpose of what I'm seeking to change the rules to achieve. But hopefully that will give members confidence to know that when the amendment is moved and is presented to all members, that they can see that has been approved by the Chief Financial Officer, and what the council is being asked to consider is legally sound in the context of the financial implications that it might bring towards the council. So again, I'm simply seeking to codify what was a long-standing custom and practice, and hopefully by codifying it removes some of the mystery, and members of the public that might be interested in these matters can see why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you, Will. Councillor Carrington.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I do have a number of questions, so I'll field a couple and then perhaps give way to others and come back later with your permission. Mr. Bell, I note you say that this is your document, and you're very careful to say that. Are you aware of some remarkable similarities between what you have generated and what is being imposed at other councils also administered by reform?
I'm absolutely staggered if that's the case, because I can assure you this is my document that I have taken from many other council constitutions across a variety of areas. I can give you absolute assurance to that. Naturally, Chairman, I accept that assurance. Some specific questions, if I may. As I said, I'll field a couple. The document on page 258, section 1.2, talking about the time limit for motions and amendments, you give a number of reasons. One of those reasons is to ensure that it is constitutional. Could you tell us how many previous occasions there are of a motion being tabled and it was subsequently discovered to be unconstitutional because we didn't have the 10 days notice to check it? In terms of my tenure at this council, I can say no issues with the validity of the motions that have been presented from the respective political groups. There might have been some minor tweaks required, but generally speaking, they're of good order and high standard. All I'm simply seeking to do is to ensure that those motions go out with the council summons along with all other papers. That's it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bell. So we've established that as far as being unconstitutional is concerned, whilst we understand your concern for the future, there is no evidence that this has been a problem in the past. Can I therefore ask you about the second reason which you give here, which is to ensure that the Chief Financial Officer is able to give correct advice? Could you give us any examples in the past of the Chief Financial Officer having given incorrect advice because of the lack of 10 days' notice?
Again, I'm not aware of any examples. What I would say is from the last budget meeting, the Chief Finance Officer had to respond in short order to deal with several amendments, and therefore I think it's incumbent on me to recognise that and seek, if there is a way, to apply some reflective practice to try and ensure a more proportionate management of those issues, so that we're not running around at the last minute having to consider these matters and give them the thought and the respect that they deserve. So the purpose of my amendment is to simply build in a little bit more time to enable those deliberations, which are serious deliberations, to be carried out, and ensure that they are factored into the document that is then presented to the council. But again, I can say with some confidence that I have every confidence in the advice that the Chief Financial Officer has given in my tenure with the authority, and I have no reason to doubt the comprehensiveness and thoroughness of that advice. I'm simply seeking to ensure a little bit more time is afforded for that advice to be given.
So we've established, through you, Chairman, that the reason given regarding the Constitution, there have been no problems regarding the Constitution. We've established that there have been, for the second reason, the Chief Financial Officer, that there has been no duff advice given by the Chief Financial Officer. And yes, I was present at that budget meeting, and the Chief Financial Officer did answer a lot of questions. He did face a lot of questions. Bluntly, that is what the Chief Financial Officer is there for. And it was a debate. Things are said in debates, answers are sought. In another part of my life, I am also an officer who becomes involved in local government debates and has to service my members. If I cannot answer a question, I go back, find the answer, and come back later. What we seem to have established is that the two primary reasons here don't actually have any foundation in fact. I absolutely understand Mr. Bell is concerned to protect us from future errors by these rather draconian measures. But a debate, Chairman, is a debate. Things are said in a debate, and what's crucial about a debate, it seems to me, is that we listen to each other. I do have some other points, Chairman, but I will give way to others, and perhaps, with your permission, come back later.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak on that? Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. To come back to the points around the amendments, so we're going to require 3 days notice on amendments. But if we look back to, for example, the motion on digital ID that required an amendment during the meeting because the original motion was incorrect around which government department needs to be written to, that motion would have failed had we implemented these rules. So actually, we've already got evidence that these rules aren't going to work because only 6 months ago we had to implement the current constitution, not the new constitution that's been put forward. So there's already an argument, there's evidence that the old constitution worked and the new one didn't, and that's within this administration. So it doesn't make sense to me. When it comes to amendments needing CFO sign-off, well, there's already a comment on the amendments at full council with the CFO's comments on there. So again, so that's not a justification because we already had it. That already exists. That's already a thing. And then we're saying that we're going to group together amendments. Well, surely every amendment should be debated on its own merits. When we look at the amendments that were moved during the last council meeting, there may have been a £5 million investment in highways or a £50,000 spending on libraries. You can't say both of those things are the same and that they can be debated together because they need justification on their own merit. So allowing the chairman to group together all of the opposition's amendments into one to try and have shorter council meetings simply is not justified. It doesn't make sense and it doesn't work. So I think that that categorically has to come out. You cannot group together amendments. They are justified on their own means. They must be debated on their own means.
Yeah, with respect, I'm not suggesting that happens. All I'm suggesting is that the chairman may propose to council that that might be a better way of dealing with the business that's before it. That will be considered on its merits. Ultimately, that's not within the prerogative of the chairman. That will be within the prerogative of the full council. And as I say, my proposals fall short of, unlike some councils that do vest that power in the chairman or the mayor. It's simply an opportunity to have that matter considered based upon, again, the long-standing custom and practice of this council. So I'm not seeking to compel that to happen. I'm simply seeking for that to be considered ultimately, but ultimately that will be the decision of the full council.
Andrew, and then we'll come back to Councillor Carey.
I see, Chairman, we're asked to note these changes. Are they ready for decision? The strength of feeling expressed by the two councillors on my right suggests a fundamental challenge to the effectiveness and the soundness in democratic process. And thus, are they ready to be here? Do they need to be reconsidered elsewhere?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, as the person who made the comments for the Chief Finance Officer at the budget meeting, I don't think anybody's trying to argue that the value of the debate at council was good, that the budget debate was healthy and exactly what you would expect from a healthy budget debate. I think the challenge is the amendments did all have Chief Finance Officer comments on them. I'd rather not do them in my pyjamas the night before if that was the situation that we was in, and trying to do them the morning of the meeting. So just to be clear, the Local Government Act section 25 says the council has to give due consideration to the Chief Finance Officer comments in the realisticness of the estimates that are being made. If they are not presented to officers in time to give that thorough consideration, you're probably not getting the best out of the Chief Finance Officer in terms of how realistic and deliverable those estimates are. The comments that were made for the amendments were fairly bland and single narrative because of the time that we had to review them. It's just trying to make the debate fully informed and healthy, and to make sure that all council members have got all of the information in front of them that they are required to have to do that lawfully.
But on that, so this council has a really good record of goodwill in terms of group leaders working with officers. If that was a concern, why not come to the group leaders and just say, can we have more time moving forward? Like we do with the number of motions, there is an agreement with the number of motions moved at full council. There is an agreement in place. There's nothing stopping us now moving 50 motions on full council day if we want to. So we have to work on an element of goodwill, as we always have an element of respect between councillors and officers. If you were concerned by the deadline that was given to you on the amendments, just go to the group leader. You know, we're not here to be unreasonable.
But if that's given on the morning of the meeting, then there is no time to do that, is there? And I think all that Will's trying to codify is that bad good practice that's always existed in the past, of giving officers time to give full consideration to what's being presented, to make sure that the comments that we are presenting that are required to go with those amendments, specifically around the budget, are truly reflective of the position that council members need to consider when they're considering that. I think the comment, write a letter in representation, the comments are really straightforward. There are no financial implications of writing a letter as representation. So I don't understand why codifying that would be an issue either. I think it's just really to make sure that as officers we give the process due time and consideration to make sure you know, that all members have all of the information that's helpful for them in the chamber.
Well, the issue with the digital ID motion is that it wasn't valid because you write into a government department that didn't exist on the original motion. So the amendment had to be correct which department that was going to. This wouldn't allow us to do that because you have to have 3 days on the amendment. You couldn't then amend it. So that motion would have been worthless because you write into a government department that doesn't exist. So these changes would have already had an impact had they been done earlier. That's the problem. The evidence suggests that actually the existing constitution gives more flexibility than what's being proposed, and that's flexibility that may well be needed during the meeting.
I think Will can come back. I don't think that is what's intended for discussion at the meeting, whatever the... Okay, I'll let Will comment on that.
The provisions in the Constitution still apply that enable motions to be altered during the debate following representations for other political groups. That operational flexibility still exists within the Constitution, and these recommendations do not seek to take members away from that. And similarly, the Council as a collective has its inherent jurisdiction to deal with matters as it sees fit on the basis of what's discussed in the chamber on the day. There's always that flexibility through the role of the chairman to adjust and adapt to ensure that the will of council is properly considered and debated. So that particular issue, I recall it and understand the point that's being made, but there is that flexibility still within the rules to enable that to be remedied during the debate. All I'm seeking through as the motions and amendments, and thank you to Michelle for the clarity in terms of the support in terms of how that will help her with her role, is to just give officers a little bit more time to give these things the proper consideration for the benefit of all members. I'm certainly not seeking to dictate the way things should be dealt with, just to, as I say, codify what has been long-standing custom and practice.
Can I just ask, so during the actual meeting, if as a result of debate, is there no way that the head of democratic services can allow an amendment to be considered as a result of the debate?
There is still that provision in the Constitution, and there is the opportunity, as I say, for a motion to be altered during the debate, following, as I've seen in this council, where there's been a quite valid suggestion from the opposition benches that actually that is very constructive, and I'm going to amend my motion. I'm going to alter my motion to reflect that constructive contribution from the opposition benches, so that the motion, as altered, is then put before council, and generally speaking, on that basis, is dealt with by way of consent. So that flexibility is still there, and I'm certainly not seeking to intrude on that flexibility. I'm just seeking to ensure that wherever possible, the motion and the amendments are documented. They carry the comments of the Chief Finance Officer, such as they are, because as Michelle said, many of the motions that we bring before the council will invariably result in a recommendation that the leader of the council writes off to a government department to make certain representations. So generally speaking, the CFO's comments will be probably quite minimal in that context. But that's the purpose of the suggested reforms.
But then you're talking about motions on notice and the motions without notice. And so it's a case of you can't change the substantive motion on a motion without notice. So again, it is actually stifling what you're trying to do, because you've got very little that you'll be able to do without any notice. You'll need 3 days. You're pretty limited in terms of what you can actually do with amendment. It's effectively a waste of time. You can't amend anything during the meeting at that point. So that's the problem. The constitutional changes limits, as you mentioned, a long-standing tradition. The long-standing tradition has always worked. We've never had this problem before. And now all of a sudden we're needing to introduce sweeping changes to the way that we conduct our council meetings. I don't see the point of it.
Can Can I just interject? Can we start finishing up on this point, please, so then we can move on to some more questions from members? Did you want to just respond quickly to that, Will, and then I can move on to Councillor Bunny?
I mean, my general experience at the council is that invariably, once amendments are settled, they are then put before the council in that final form. It's quite rare that we seek to further amend an amendment. As I've said, there are and have been situations where through constructive debate the mover of a motion has acceded to a point from the opposition, and that has then been reflected by way of an alteration to the motion. But generally speaking, the practice has been that once the amendment has been settled and has been put before the council, that is what is debated. We generally shy away from seeking to further amend amendments. That's not something that we have made a habit of doing, certainly in my time. And as I say, I'm simply seeking to just add some clarity in terms of motions and amendments to ensure that they're given the proper consideration that they should be, so that when they are put before the council, whether that's through being shared at the order of proceedings or on the day of the meeting when the member seeks to rise to put the amendment, that there is confidence that the amendment is sound and takes account of the financial implications on the council. And yes, that is what we sought to do previously through the order of proceedings, but that only works if the amendment is disclosed in the order of proceedings, and that's not always been the case.
Thank you, Will. Let's all remember that we have got a vote at the end of this item. So, Councillor Bunny.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to pick up a bit about amendments, if I might. I've sat on this council, 5 years now? 4 years. The previous council, when we discussed the budget, we actually put all the amendments together as one, which meant that each individual only had 3 minutes to speak and actually stifled some of the debate that we might have wanted to have. And I think that was one of the issues which certainly I took on board at the last chairman's brief before the budget, because as you know, I was chair, and it was quite clear then that we were getting a lot more amendments coming through than we might have had in previous years, and I felt that there was a need for that debate to be taken place. I do take the point that perhaps it would have been easier if we'd actually seen them all in advance, because I think on the day we were only getting some of them on the morning, which makes it difficult. But I would really wish to see that we do have that opportunity to debate on each subject that it comes forward, rather than just on one opportunity in the combined debate.
Thank you. Who's next? Councillor Roberts, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to mention the elephant in the room here. From all accounts, previous budget meetings haven't gone on so long. It was purely political. Let's be frank on this. Let's not try and beat about the bush. Let's not beat about the bush. It's purely political. Now, I've got no problem at all in, as I chair, obviously, the Overview Scrutiny Management Board, having absolutely loads and loads and loads of amendments. The problem is that the amendments all appeared on the day or the day before. It wasn't as if they had thought of them only that day. It was purely political to try and turn it into an absolute nightmare. Now, if we are, and we get provided the amendments in advance, then a logical approach would be we could say, okay, we've got 50 amendments here, perhaps we might have to do it over 2 days. It's as simple as that. The fact that it was purely political and all of it came in one day, it put Michelle under great scrutiny. We can't scrutinise these amendments properly because quite simply we've not got the time to do so. When we do anything in OSMB and other meetings, we have plenty of time to look and read over the paperwork. So it's purely political. Obviously, none of the amendments went through because really we didn't think either we agreed with them or not 99% of the time, or we didn't have time to scrutinise it. So it is purely political. I totally agree with everything on here. We have to have time to have the amendments come through. We've got no problem with scrutinising amendments, got no problem with looking at different things, but the fact is, it was purely political. It was done intentionally to try and make it look chaotic. That was the reason. This is talking from somebody who's new to this type of job. It was obviously a stitch up. So us altering certain criteria, we're not trying to stop scrutiny, we're trying to give more chance for us to scrutinise each amendment. And whatever my good friends over this side are actually saying, again, is purely political because it's changed. So I think these amendments are purely for that reason. I don't think we're trying to hide anything, we're trying to not scrutinise anything. It is purely political, and this is why I support these changes. Thank you.
Should we come back to you, Councillor Carrington, for your other questions?
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman, and I'm grateful for Councillor Roberts' honesty that this is a political response to what he perceives as a political problem, but he does sit rather in tension with what we've heard from Mr. Bell, which, as I've said, I absolutely accept. Chairman, Michelle spoke very eloquently, and Mr. Bell said something very similar, that basically what they were trying to do was codify previous good practice. And if this was simply trying to codify good practice, I would support it. It is not simply codifying previous good practice. This goes a country mile beyond where this council has been in the past. Mr. Bell makes references to other councils. I'm not really that interested in other councils. I'm interested in what is right for Lincolnshire County Council and what is right for the people of Lincolnshire, and ensuring that they can have proper scrutiny of the administration and proper debate in debates. That's why they're called debates, and committees are groups of people who come together to solve problems and to look into matters. What Mr. Bell has described would, when he says, well, we'll give these matters to the discretion of the chairman, I hope he would admit that in practice that means any party could vote, if the chairman puts the matter to the vote, for example in full council, could use its majority to ensure that either things are brought together and not properly debated individually, or indeed not debated at all. Now, I absolutely support the fact that if you get a majority in this house, this chamber rather, either of one party or of a group of people coming together on a non-party basis, that decides policy and action going forward. But to use potentially a majority to stifle debate, that seems to me fundamentally anti-democratic. And a lot of the measures go way beyond getting the good offices of group leaders to talk to each other about sensible ways of going forward. And they actually seem to take what should be a live debate and try and get it all prefigured, all sorted out behind the scenes in a room where just the important people are there, where the ordinary members of this council don't get a say, don't have an input. There are at least 6 major new restrictions. Now, I'm all for making sure that our business is conducted properly, but we've already heard in answer to my first questions that some of the core reasons given, there is no evidence to substantiate the risk put forward by Mr. Bell in this paper. Now, I accept that it is his paper and not the administration's, whatever others may have said in this chamber. But really, this is an unwarranted restriction on the ability of ordinary councillors to engage in debate. And I repeat, finally, Chairman, what I said before. Debate doesn't just involve speaking. It involves all of us who are privileged to be in this chamber, particularly during full council, listening. And if you're simply cooking everything up beforehand with this very draconian set of measures, that takes away our ability to listen, learn, and respond, which is what we were doing. So this is for noting. We aren't going to vote on it, I guess, but I really can't support these, and I would ask that the officers and administration take these comments away and absolutely rethink these, because I think this is an unwarrantable restriction on democracy. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. To come back to the point actually raised by Councillor Bunny, I think it's a really interesting one where, as we all know, the chairman of the council will group together opposition motions. That's just what's going to happen, opposition amendments. That is what's going to happen if these rules are pushed through. And I suppose he's right in terms of then members will only receive 3 minutes to potentially discuss 10, 15 different amendments. Now, if you have an amendment that specifically affects a certain area, you as the elected councillor are going to be able to discuss that amendment plus everything else for 3 minutes maximum. That's not allowing any councillor to do their job for their elected people. It's distinctly unfair. So by giving the chairman, who is part of the leading group, absolute power over all of this, if it was an independent chair, there may be a different conversation. But the chairman will be guided by the leader of the council in terms of what they want to happen. So as we know, what will happen is that opposition groups will be shut down as much as is physically possible to try to reduce the amount of time spent scrutinising this administration. And that is not fair and that is not democracy.
Vice Chair.
So, I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Roberts said. I mean, Councillor Parkinson has just spoken about representing residents. If certain individuals had concentrated on representing residents instead of playing petty political games, we wouldn't be in this position now, and we are only codifying what was polite convention beforehand.
I'd be interested to know what petty political games they are, because the motions that were moved within the budget were things like freezing council tax, for example, investing money into libraries. I'm not sure that constitutes petty political games. Is that not what's trying to do best for the people of Lincolnshire?
I'm not talking about the subject of the amendments, I'm talking about the manner in which they were submitted.
Andrew.
I was in error when I introduced my last comment, Chairman. We're not asked to note it, we're asked to endorse these proposals and recommend them to the council. So it does look like we're headed for a vote.
We are, yes. So we will note them and we will be voting on this item. Do we have any more questions on it before we go to the vote? Councillor Roberts.
Just to come back, thank you, Chair, to the point of me saying it was political, the fact that all the amendments appeared lastminute.com meant that the actual councillors that put them forward were not taking them seriously. They were used as a weapon, that was all. If they've got serious things they want to look at and put amendments in, allow more scrutiny by allowing us to have a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever amount of time. The actual 24 hours working days is specifically the last time we need them, not before. And that was the whole point. It wasn't so much the actual amendments, there were some quite good ones. If we'd had further time to look at them, then who knows what might have happened. But it was the actual fact that they all appeared when they did, that was blatant. We want to work together, we wanted to provide the best service we can for our residents. But doing that is purely political, purely childish, and I personally think this time, when we have the next one coming up, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Thank you.
This is the last one.
Well, I just want to state, so obviously there was a point raised by Councillor Dilks that actually he raised the concern around library funding during OSMB. It was a point that he specifically made that was noted by the chair at that point. Nothing then happened, so he then moved an amendment at full council to introduce the funding. So the opportunity existed at OSMB for the executive to bring that into the budget. They chose not to. So there was absolutely, the opportunity exists to do these things. That's the point of these scrutiny committees, to take the feedback from the members into the budget. The administration chose not to do that. He then moved an amendment. There was ample opportunity to say that you need 2 weeks. You didn't. They were given it weeks before OSMB. They chose to do nothing with it. That was the reason. There is ample opportunity within the existing framework to make those changes.
Councillor Roberts.
Just to come back, when did he put that amendment in? Did he actually put it in a day before, or did he?
I don't know when he submitted the amendment,
Precisely.
but it was noted at OSMB.
Kane, let's be frank on this. You know, I'm not sure which party he was with at the time, you know that quite simply it was a hatchet job. If he had put forward an amendment and gave us time to look into it more, then perhaps it might have actually passed. But it was a hatchet job. Everybody knows it's the case. Hopefully, now what will happen is if you've got amendments for the next full council, for the next big council meeting, that they're put in with plenty of time, and then we can review them. Because there's this theory that we were going to go against absolutely everything regardless. If we'd had a chance to actually look at it, we might have had a chance to find funding for the libraries, etc. I'm hoping he's going to use his grant money for that. But we didn't. It was literally a hatchet job, one after another, just purely for political gain. If we actually start acting professionally and look at the Nolan principles, and perhaps we might do it properly. And this next time, we can do it. I haven't got a problem if there's 1,000 amendments. If we've got time to look at it, and we then work out, well, in actual fact, councillors, we're going to have to do this over a week, fine. I've got no problem with any scrutiny whatsoever. The problem is it wasn't done for that reason. It was purely done to try and gain the narrative. Thank you.
Just to be very clear on the Nolan principles, there's only one group leader that's currently under investigation, and it's not ours.
I think we're finished on this one. So we are taking a vote on this. So we're voting on this to basically endorse what we've heard. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Roberts. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bean. Those in favour? Against? Any abstentions?
So, just to advise committee, the chairman has the casting vote in this circumstance.
So I vote for, so that is carried.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Could you just advise me, or perhaps seek advice from our Democratic Services Officer? Is it not the convention, and much reference has been made to conventions, that where the chairman exercises a casting vote, he would normally vote in favour of the status quo rather than of change? Thank you.
So, yeah, if you go ahead with that.
I can't comment on previous ways that the chairs have voted, but it's under Procedure Rule 15 in the Constitution that the council, that the chairman may have the casting vote when all votes are equal.
Thank you, Chairman.
Point of order, Chair. Can I ask that my vote is recorded, please?
Absolutely.
I think that may go for both of us as well.
We really need to have done that before the vote voted.
Right. So, being advised that we should have had that before the vote. So, is that final?
I can double check the Constitution to make sure. Give me a minute.
Yeah, well, we'll double check it, because if that is how it's worded in the Constitution,
It just needs noting in the minutes, doesn't it? That's
it'll
all
be
it
noted
is.
in the minutes as will everything. But if you want your vote recorded, as say, then we can advise members afterwards.
But in
what you
nearly
say.
every other meeting that's happened, people have asked for the vote to be recorded afterwards, so that needs to be clarified by Dem Services then, because otherwise that's happened in nearly every other meeting where it's happened. So.
And if I may, just to help you, Chairman, in the previous council, and much reference has been made today about all this good practice that apparently is just being codified for reasons described by the Vice Chairman and Councillor Roberts as political. In the previous council, all sorts of people asked for their vote to be recorded at the end. It was not done the way that Mr. Cross is now saying it should be done. So why don't we just have a little bit of fairness?
I'm all for fairness. I'm being advised about the wording in the Constitution, and if that's you know, if that's what it says, that's what it says. But if you want your vote recorded, no. If you want your vote recorded, we'll have it noted. That's absolutely fine. So if I'm sat here being advised by Democratic Services next to me, that's the advice I'm taking. But also, I will have your vote noted. That is absolutely fine. I'm not saying anything against that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As I understood it, there is a difference between a recorded vote and asking for your vote to be recorded or noted afterwards. And I think that's the point that we're making at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Bunny. Right, so we can move on now, can't we, to item number 7. So item number 7 is the Information Assurance Annual Report, and we'll receive that from David Ingham, Head of Information Assurance.
Good morning, Chairman. This report summarises the work undertaken by 12 staff in the Information Assurance Service during 25-26. Throughout the year, our core objective remained consistent, and that's to support colleagues to deliver their services in a safe, transparent and lawful manner. As you will see, the report highlights a year of increased demand and complexity across the 3 core domains of the service, which are records management, information security and information governance. If I could just cover some key highlights from the report, starting with the increase in engagement with the IES service. Once again, we've seen a significant increase in the number of support requests we received, with a 35% increase in task numbers. This is our highest ever level of support, and it's worth noting that this increase follows on from 4 years of previous increases. The increase in activity does present resourcing challenges, there's no getting away from that, and we have worked hard to ensure the effectiveness of our service and our response was not negatively impacted, and this is demonstrated by the fact we continue to meet our response KPIs. But overall, the increase is a positive indicator as more colleagues than ever are seeking advice and guidance from the IES service, which in turn helps to raise awareness and manage information risk. Obviously, our work touches on every corner of the council. However, as you would expect, our focus was on those areas processing the most sensitive information, namely children's and adult services, which accounted for nearly 60% of our support. If I may, Chairman, I'll just touch on each of the 3 strands, starting with information governance. There was a 142% increase in data protection complaints. A total of 87 complaints were investigated by our data protection officer. Of those, 27 were either upheld or partially upheld, with 42 not upheld. The remainder were ongoing or withdrawn. We did undertake a review of the complaints received to understand root cause. However, the analysis did not identify a single underlying cause for the increase. The reasons are therefore likely to be varied. In particular, the increase may reflect growing public awareness of data protection rights, alongside greater scrutiny of how organisations collect, use and manage personal data. This is supported by the Information Commissioner's Office own annual report, which shows they too have seen significant increase in data protection complaints, and they are of a similar view that the figures reflect growing public engagement with information rights. There is also some anecdotal evidence to suggest that artificial intelligence tools may be enabling individuals to produce more detailed and sophisticated complaints. However, at this stage, there is insufficient concrete evidence to conclude that this is a significant contributing factor. Despite the overall increase in complaints, there was a 38% reduction in complaints received via the Information Commissioner's Office. 5 were received, none were upheld by the ICO. And I'd like to give the committee assurances that on each occasion where a complaint is upheld, we use the lessons learned to drive improvement. I also want to quickly highlight the 97% completion rate of information assurance e-learning, which is a tremendous response and one of our highest ever. Moving on to records management, within the report you'll see reference to the ongoing project to review hard copy records held in off-site storage. We continue to make excellent progress against the project plan, now with over 500,000 hard copy records reviewed and subject to improved governance, and over 163,000 now destroyed. We expect this project to end March 2029, when it is assessed we will be in a far better position and key risks within tolerance. We've also initiated work across the digital environment. This includes working with colleagues in IT to embed improved records management controls across Microsoft 365 and reviewing aged digital information held in shared drives. Finally, moving on to information security, a key headline is another increase, this time in the number of reported security incidents. Over the year, we've recorded and investigated 520 reported security incidents, which is a 30% increase. Of those, 484 were identified as actual incidents, again a 38% increase. We do, however, know the cause of this increase, and it is overwhelmingly driven by hardware assets, i.e. laptops, being reported unaccountable by our previous IT provider in the period leading up to the end of their contract. We assess this as being, in the main, a case of inventory reconciliation rather than high numbers of staff losing IT assets over a short period. This is supported by the fact many of the devices were last seen some years ago and are aged, and that the number of assets reported this financial year has significantly reduced, with only one reported to date. I'd like to highlight the colleagues in IT service have introduced improved controls to minimise asset loss and align it with industry best practice. This has and will lead to better oversight and control. If I may also, I just want to mention benchmarking of security incidents, a point raised last year in this committee. We have found no official, consistent, reliable measure to benchmark against. However, a recent report analysing freedom of information requests from 78 local authorities found that personal data breaches increased by an average of 53% over 5 years. By comparison, our data shows a 47% increase over the same period. The same analysis found referrals to the ICO's office are up 41% over the same period. During 25-26, we had 0 referrals. This was primarily down to the effective response of the team and the reporting service following reported incidents. In summary, Chair, this has been another exceptionally busy year for the Information Assurance Service. Committee members will notice that many of the metrics within this report have increased. However, these increases should not all be viewed in the same way. In some areas, they are a positive reflection of greater engagement, improved awareness and a stronger culture of transparency across the organisation. In others, they highlight growing demand and increasing pressures that require ongoing management and an effective response. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. Around the 163,000 records that were destroyed, so, I mean, obviously that's a lot. So why were we hanging on to that number of records that could have previously been destroyed? What's the cause of that?
Very good question. So, because we produce so much information, be it hard copy or digital, it is very difficult to manually review those records by officers. So what we have is a dedicated team to undertake that work, and we can take the pressure off the service areas to do that. Prior to this work going on, we reviewed all retention periods to make sure they're up to date and they met our legal obligations. So now we've got a system in place which is systematic, which is logical, and which can review quickly a lot of records in a short space of time. So essentially the answer to your question is people didn't have time to manage the records properly, they didn't have the resources to do that, and unfortunately their time was needed elsewhere. And it's a common issue across many organisations that process this source of information.
So effectively, these were documents that probably should have been destroyed years ago, but we didn't have the resource at that point to be able to do that then effectively.
100% correct.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. On page 286, 87 data protection complaints, what were these? Were they data that had been leaked, or can we be more specific? Thank you.
So we separate data protection infringements and personal data breaches. Infringements are those that go against the principles of data protection law. So, for example, where we may process somebody's information for a purpose which we didn't initially gather it for, or where the information is inaccurate. So the top category of complaints was unauthorised sharing. So this is where an individual believes they have the right and intention to share their information with a third party, but actually on reflection, it seems that they may have overshared. So there was no malicious intent there, it was purely done for best of intentions. The second category of information, second category of complaint is subject access requests. So this is where requests have perhaps been replied to late, or the requester has complained that the information contained within the request is not accurate. So we do categorise all of the complaints. We look for trends, and we look for patterns, and when we identify those trends and patterns, we seek to improve the process.
Thank you. Could I ask another question, Chair?
Yeah.
Page 290, 157 missing assets. What were these missing assets? Did we find them, and did we prosecute people for stealing them? Thank you.
So the missing assets was essentially laptops, IT hardware. When an IT asset is reported lost, the first thing we do is ensure it's encrypted and we remove it from the network. So we remove the risk to the information and we remove it to the network. There are many reasons why IT assets are lost. So they could be lost by the individual, they could be stolen, they could be misplaced, or it could be an inventory issue. Our analysis of the high number of assets reported lost during last year was primarily because of inventory reconciliation issues, i.e. our previous provider was going through their records, identified missing assets, could not find those assets. That's not to say they're lost, that's to say that necessarily the audit trail is incomplete, but they still reported us as a skewed instance, so we would carry out that investigation. So not all assets that are reported as lost are necessarily being stolen or misplaced. It's more likely in our analysis that the inventory trail of that asset is corrupt.
Councillor Carrington.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. What I take out of this report is the absolutely staggering weight of work that is involved in managing information, particularly when we are a public body and have responsibilities in so many areas, and so much of the information we deal with is sensitive. The report quite rightly highlights where things have gone wrong and points to the fact that investigations have been carried out and that there are solutions. But I think the team involved in this deserves a big well done, because the sheer scale of what is going on here, the sensitivity of the information, and indeed the strictness of the rules around it, both national and ones that came in from abroad, which are now part of our own laws. These are very, very, very tight regulations. So I just wanted to say well done to the team. It's an incredibly onerous task, a very necessary one. Well done.
Thank you, and I think we can all get behind that. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yep.
Just around the situation with the FOIs, because I think the response time on the freedom of information request is still an issue and can cause us some concerns about being referred to the ICO. I know it's something we've discussed previously, but is there a longer term plan to get on top of these, because it's still a problem?
So data protection complaints doesn't include freedom of information because there's different pieces of legislation. But I can answer that actually. So we're doing some work currently to improve our responsiveness to colleagues' requests for FOI support. So the new access to information policy, which was recently authorised by Chief Exec Councillor for Resources, improves the policy, widens the scope, sets out clear responsibilities for both staff, teams and for legal, and overall this will help colleagues to respond to FOIs faster. We're just implementing this, so I can't tell you if that's working or not, but obviously we'll monitor it over time to make sure that it is effective.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. One last question. You mentioned about obviously getting rid of records. I assume none of these are really old historical records, and that just basically is probably basic data that you no longer need. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the first part of that question.
Yeah, sorry, it's historical records, so it may be a document from 1909 or something that was obviously in the council. I assume that those aren't the documents that you're getting destroyed or disposing of, I assume. Any historical documents? Thank you.
Not necessarily. If they're historically important, they might be passed to archive for permanent retentions, but that's part of the retention process. So we have a clear set of retention periods that determines legal obligations and business need. If we decide that it needs destroyed, we'll also consider it for any historical value, so to make sure it's passed over to the right people. We don't destroy everything. We'd like to, because it'd be easier to manage it, but we don't destroy everything.
Councillor Bunny.
Thank you. just picking up on historical records, in previous meetings I seem to remember people saying that there were records around the county in old, whether it be schools or offices which are no longer used. Have most of those now been brought in and dealt with?
So we don't cover schools. Schools are responsible for their own records because under data protection law, they are known as a controller and therefore the legal obligations sit with them. So we don't support them in terms of records management. The first stage of this project actually was about building rationalisation. So we worked with property and project management staff to review all of the buildings that were going to be moved or emptied to make sure all records within those buildings were extracted, reviewed, and then they were either retained and pushed off site or they were destroyed.
Just coming back on that, having worked at the Aston in Market Raisin, we did have information there after we became LMS or whatever it was. We had information there which related to the county council when that was responsible for the school. So I'm talking about historical in that case.
Yes, so if they possess council information, but it's being held for their own purposes and they own it, they then control it, they are responsible for it. So once it passes from the council to the school, it then becomes their obligation. It's the same with personal data. So if we have a staff file which we hold, we are responsible for it under data protection law. If we pass it to a school so they can process it for their own purposes, they then become responsible for that record. So it's about purpose and it's about ownership.
Any more questions? So the recommendation is that we note the contents of the Information Assurance Annual Report. So does anybody dissent? No. Very good. So that is agreed. I suggest we take a short break, if we can all agree on that one. I thought so. So we'll... I think we'll come back at 12 o'clock to start, and we'll try and get done in the last hour, but who knows how that'll go. everybody's back. So we are now moving on to the annual governance statement, and we will be receiving the report from Claire Goodenough, Head of Audit and Risk. Although it's not Claire Goodenough, is it? It's Claire Tomlin. So the paper hasn't updated yet.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual governance statement for the financial year 25-26, which forms part of the statutory accounts. It contains the outcome of the review of the governance processes in place and delivered throughout that financial year against the good governance principles provided by SIT for Solace. The assessment statements and the support materials were provided by contributions from directorates across the council to demonstrate how those principles were delivered during the year. The report contains the definitions available for the assessment of the review, which gives those definitions clearly within the report, and also identifies what would constitute a significant governance issue should one have occurred. The corporate leadership team agree the final statement along with the declaration that the governance structures, processes and practices in place at the time aligned with the good governance framework. I've also noted your comments, Councillor Parkinson, about the transparency, and we'll feed that back to the heads of service who provide that review for next year. Other than that, very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, just to follow up, thank you, Claire. I appreciate that. It is difficult when you receive phone calls from local businesses saying, "I've been told this," and then you weren't even aware that those conversations were happening in the first place. So it's just making sure that all service areas where there are ongoing conversations, that, for example, we're CC'd into emails. It may not be that we have to be directly involved, but if we're aware of what's going on, we can then help that local business, because I've had it before where they've come saying, "I can't get hold of LCC for this issue," or actually it's a district council issue. And again, had the county council said, "I've received this correspondence from a company within your division," I can then jump on that quicker than maybe what the processes would allow the council to as well. So it's just making sure that people are aware so that we can help our constituents as best we can.
So again, I'll pass those on to the people who do that review of transparency. It is judged against the SIT for Solace code rather than individual activities, but I can certainly make sure they can give that consideration next year.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? No. So the recommendation is that the committee considers the annual government statement for 2025 and agree that it accurately reflects the governance arrangements in place throughout 2025-2026, and that the statement includes any significant governance issues and key risks that it would expect to be published, and approves the AGS for inclusion in the statutory accounts, being amended only if any relevant matters are identified during the external audit review process. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Carrington. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bean. We'll now vote. Those in favour? That is unanimous. Item number 9 is the Audit Committee work programme, and we'll receive that from Claire Tomlin again.
Thank you, Chair. So, as usual, the work programme outlines the reports that are due to the committee across the rest of this financial year. I'm very happy to take any comments or views on the assurance reporting from the committee.
One thing, there was an email that came from, I believe, Councillor Dilks with regards to the Grantham High Street audit. I don't think I ever saw the response about whether or not that's going to come to this committee or not. So I don't know whether the chairman or anybody else can clarify for me.
Yeah, Claire, do you want to respond to that?
Councillor Parkinson, I can confirm that the next progress report from the audit function will come in September, and that will be discussed at that point during the September meeting.
Lovely, that will be noted. So, are we all happy with the report? We can all agree on that one. We'll move on now. So now we'll move into consideration of exempt information. So in accordance with section 100 Section A4, the Local Government Act 1972. The following agenda items have not been circulated to the press and public on the grounds that they are considered to contain exempt information as defined in paragraph 7 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. The press and public may be excluded from the meeting for consideration of these items of business. So, do we all agree?